Another thing that you need to know before we start is that this webinar can have serious side effects for which I nor my co-authors will be held responsible for it. And the side effects are these. You may experience a sudden desire to assess and rethink your academic writing. So this might be a side effect of this presentation. And you may actually experience a desire to write more. Be careful with that. That's always dangerous when we academic writers feel like writing. It's like, this is weird. It doesn't feel right, right? So these can be side effects from this presentation. Be aware. If side effects occur, then what you need to do immediately is report to your colleagues or your advisor, supervisor, or somebody around you with the only purpose of celebrating. Don't, that's all. You just want to, if that happens, you want to celebrate because it doesn't happen very often. Agreed? When you're an academic writer, it's rare that you really want to write all the time. Okay, so I teach writing productivity, academic writing productivity. So a question that I get very often, and you may have asked this question yourself a couple of times, is what should I do to become a productive and successful academic writer? A lot of us have that question in mind. A lot of students come to my classes with that question in mind. And usually when we ask that question, what happens is that we get answers such as, well, do this, try this. Try this tool or do this way, like write every day, or get a tool online that'll correct your grammar for you or something like that. And I know these are common answers because I give them in my classes, right? So students come to my class and I give them a lot of tools and a lot of resources and a lot of strategies. Do this way, etc. But then I started observing that some students that went through my classes really got it. And they went out and became incredibly productive and prolific writers. Mina and Malika are examples of that. But I also observed that some students would go through my classes and come back a little bit later and say, I tried the things you taught in class and they just didn't work for me. And I was intrigued by that. I'm going, why does it work so well for some and not well at all for some other people? And I started just observing. I have not done an empirical study on this. Maybe one of you would like to study that, but just from observation, what I started noticing was that for the people for whom it didn't work, what they seemed to be doing was using the strategies or the tools that I presented in class or in workshops and stuff. They were using those tools in isolation. So they would say, okay, I tried writing every day. That didn't work for me. I tried logging or tracking my writing time or pages or words. That didn't work for me. And so they would try one strategy, and if it didn't work, they would drop it. And they would try the next strategy and drop it. And I started thinking, I told you I'm interested in complex systems, right? So everything I'm doing now, I'm filtering through that lens of complex dynamic systems. And I'm thinking, I wonder if the reason that didn't work for a lot of people is the fact that they're trying these tools and these strategies and these steps in isolation. They don't have this integrated or some kind of a system where they put some of these things together with other things, right? So that's what prompted me starting to look at academic writing as we need a system. And actually, folks, I don't know about you, but I have found that for a lot of things that I struggle with doing something, whatever it might be, some of you know me, I do needlework, I do needle lace and difficult projects like that. And I started learning that I could only tackle the really complex projects only if I had a system. We'll talk about what a system is in a minute. But when I did things that people suggested in isolation, it never worked. So I'm going to propose to you that and challenge you, if you don't remember anything else from this presentation today, just remember this one thing, that I'm challenging you to think about your academic writing as something that comes out of a system. So keep that in mind, okay? In developing a system. Now, what is a system? I haven't defined it yet, right? So here's how I'm going to define it, and I'm going to understand systems for the purposes of this talk here and our approach. The system is a set of elements, and they're interconnected elements that form a whole. That's a basic definition, dictionary definition of what a system is. I want to go one step further, though, and propose that academic writing comes out not only out of a system, but out of a complex dynamic system. So in a complex dynamic system, you have this, set of elements that interact, but these elements are in constant flux, and they're all in their interactions, they're adapting to each other, and all of that together is also changing over time. So time is a really important element in complex dynamic systems. It's a very important element for our writing. If nothing else, the notion that we mature as writers over time if we practice our writing, okay? So this is my definition of a system. And here's what I'm proposing to you, that we start looking at our academic writing as something that comes out of, emerges from, and emerges synergistically. It's more than the sum of the parts. It's something that happens, it's almost magical sometimes. It emerges from the interaction of several elements in the system. I'm going to reduce it to 4 elements. There are more elements in the system. Like I don't account for the environment, for instance, as an element here. It gets too complicated right now if I add that. But let's focus on these 4 elements of the system. Element number 1 is the most important one, which is you. You are the most vital element in this system. The other elements are a set of strategies, so ways of doing things and doing them in certain order, perhaps, and with certain steps and certain sequences, a set of strategies that are useful and helpful, a set of tools. You do know, like I'm a needle lace worker. I know that for my hobbies, I need specific tools for specific tasks. And if I have those tools, they make my life so much easier than if I don't have those tools, right? So set of strategy, a set of tools, and you need a set of support. We're going to talk about that, the different types of support that we need to have. So the idea is that if you just do one strategy here and then you didn't work, and then you try a tool over there and it didn't work, and you go and ask, join a writing group and have some support, but you're not doing any of the other things, those things are not going to work. What you really need is this combination of elements inside this system. Okay, so that's what I'm proposing and challenging, that you start thinking about your academic writing as a system. So ooh, okay, somebody muted me because I didn't. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. It just gave me a little message saying that I was muted and I didn't hit my computer, so I don't know. All right, so before we start, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do 2 minutes of free writing. I have my timer here and I'm going to actually step out of the screen because I'm gonna be writing also. I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to write, and here's what you're gonna write. Tell me, what is your system for handling academic writing? Well, I said that inappropriately. Don't tell me. Nobody has to read what you write, okay? So you don't have to share it with anybody. I'm not going to ask you to share it. I just want you to reflect on it. Now, here's the rule for these 2 minutes of free writing. The only rule is that you cannot stop to think. So the minute you put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, you start writing and you cannot stop until I come back on screen and say our time is over. So the idea is capture your thinking, capture, do not stop to think. If you're writing and you go, I can't think of anything else to write, write that down. I can't think of anything else to write, or get a word and repeat it over and over. But until the 2 minutes are up, just allow yourself to capture everything that comes to your mind, hopefully related to this question. But if your mind goes to the beach while you're writing, that's okay too. Just capture your thinking. But the question is, what is your system? Everybody has a system, even if they had never thought about it as such. They have a system, they have a way of tackling or managing their writing. What might be your system? And so hang in there. Again, I won't ask you to share, so don't feel like you have to show it to anybody. You can throw it away later. I'm going to set my timer for 2 minutes, and I'll come back and let you know that the 2 minutes are over. Okay, good. You may start. Okay, 2 minutes are up. So keep whatever you wrote in mind as we talk through the presentation today, and hopefully you'll be challenged to, if you have a system that's not working quite well, be challenged and motivated to try looking at your writing in a little bit different way. So let's start talking about this system that I'm offering. It's just one of them. It's not the only one, but I find this helpful for myself, and some people find it helpful too. So let's take a look at that. So again, the system with these 4 elements: you, a set of strategies, a set of tools, and a set of support, basically. Let's start talking about the first element, which is you. You are the most important element in the system. The system wouldn't exist if it weren't for you, in a way, right? So really what you need to start looking at is looking at yourself as an academic writer. And first and foremost, you need to ask yourself, do I see myself as an academic writer? Do I see myself as a professional writer? Right? People have different definitions of professional writer, but folks, if you're in an academic setting, even if you're a graduate student, haven't graduated yet, that's why I say even, if you haven't graduated yet, or if you're, you know, a full professor like I am, end of career type of thing, if you are in an academic setting, you are a professional writer. You're being paid to write. You may say, no, I'm being paid to do research. Well, as Sergey pointed out in the beginning, you can have the most exciting research, the most groundbreaking findings, earth-shattering discoveries in your research. If you can't write it up and communicate it to people outside of your laboratory or of your office, that research is as good as non-existent, basically, right? Therefore, you're not being paid to do the research. You're being paid to communicate that research and put that research into practice somehow. So you may not be paid the gazillions of dollars that some authors of fiction get, but you are a professional writer. So do you see yourself that way? Are you developing that identity? Identities are things that are in flux, elements. It's a trait or characteristic that is in flux, and it depends and it grows and it develops depending on the context and all of that. But you need to start thinking about yourself and viewing yourself as a professional writer. I challenge my students usually to say, okay, the next time somebody asks you, what do you do for a living? Instead of saying, I'm a graduate student or I'm a researcher or whatever, try saying, I'm a writer, and see how that feels. You know, in the beginning, it kind of feels weird sometimes to say that, but that's what you are. I'm a writer, basically, right? So if you absolutely hate writing, or you have too much anxiety associated with writing, you haven't been able to control that somehow, you need to ask yourself, am I in the right place? Is academia the right place for me? Because if you are in academia, that's going to be the most important part of your job definition, actually, is the writing. So how aware are you of the things that keep you writing, keep you going, or the things that block you? How much self-awareness and emotional intelligence to manage your own emotions related to writing, to manage the emotions and the expectations of people around you while you're writing? All of that's part of that construct of emotional intelligence. We need to have some of that. And I know a lot of academic writers that have zero emotional intelligence. They're lost, and then they struggle needlessly, I would say, because they just haven't learned these basic intrapersonal and interpersonal skills, right? So these are some of the questions that you need to ask yourself. I'm going to start with the left-hand corner. So like 10 o'clock on the watch here on the slide. Who are you as a writer? Do you know that? Do you know what makes you want to write? When are those moments that the writing flows and you go, oh my goodness, this is great. I don't want to even stop, right? What blocks you? What makes you stop writing, or what makes you start procrastinating or postponing that writing, right? Realistically, what does your writing productivity look like? What does it look like right now? And ideally, if you had no constraints, if we weren't going through a pandemic and having our schedules completely messed up and all of the losses we're suffering and all of that, if we didn't have any of that, ideally, what would your academic productivity look like? Do you have a sense of that, or do you have a goal or an ideal that you're striving for? What kind of mindset do you have as a writer? Carol Dweck's work on fixed and growth mindset is very helpful here, because a lot of people say, oh, I'll never do it. I'll never be good at it because I wasn't born a writer. I'm not a writer. Versus the people who say, I'm not a really good writer right now, but writing is something that can be learned and you can practice. I'm on the camp of the growth mindset for writing. Writing is a learned behavior. Very few people are born brilliant, awesome writers from the get-go, okay? The best writers in the world have gone through a lot of practice and a lot of redoing and a lot of rewriting what they write until you see their beautiful work. So there's always room for growth and improvement and change. But if you don't see that as a possibility, it might be holding you back, right? So who are you as a writer? That's something that you need to start observing and exploring in order for your system to start working. And if there are missing elements here, you need to start invoking them and putting them into place. The next element in this system that I'm proposing is a set of strategies. Now, I don't have time to detail, and these are not all the strategies that you can try for your writing. I'm going to throw this at you guys, but later in the tools, I'm going to give you some resources. So if you want details on these strategies, then go to the resources and you'll find, those are written resources, you'll find those described there in detail. So I apologize offhand that this is going to be very brief and superficial, but I just want to point you to some possible strategies or techniques, things that you can try doing, and that might help you with your writing, okay? The first element, and I'm going to start at 1 o'clock here on the slide. The first element that I'm going to suggest is not necessarily a strategy. It is more like an approach or a mindset. And notice that I have it in big letters. And the idea is practice, 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 practice. Remember, I told you that if there's a difference in my writing and your writing, the reason I'm facilitating this workshop and you're not, it's probably only that I have had more time to practice, more years of practice. So, but for some reason, we don't see writing, especially academic writing, as something that requires practice. For some reason, I can't explain why. And it doesn't matter where in the world you grew up and went to school. Because I teach folks from all over the world that have said the same thing, that there's this expectation, especially in school when they're growing up, that they need to write and write beautifully and perfectly and neatly and clean the first time they put something down on paper or on the screen. And I'm going, that's ridiculous, because when you're learning anything else, right? If I told you, go learn to play the violin today, you don't know anything about it, go learn to play, immediately what would come to mind is say, okay, I need to get a violin first to practice on, but then I need to practice, right? So for any other task, what we call motor behavior tasks, or tasks that are done that involve your mind and your brain and your body, we expect, there is an expectation that there will be practice. Practice will be inherent into it. But somehow there's not this expectation for writing. I don't know where the heck that comes from, but that's true. So we need to shift our focus and look at academic writing as something that needs to be learned and has to be practiced and practiced and practiced. And I'm going to propose that it's not, we tend to think of practice as repetition merely. I'm going to say that we need to look at our writing from the perspective of deep or deliberate practice. And I don't have time to really go into the concept here. Just make a note of that, deep or deliberate practice. And if you want a tool for that or a resource for that, maybe Mina or Malika could put it in the chat for you guys. It's a book called The Talent Code by Dan Coyle. And in that book, he describes deep or deliberate practice as this special type of practice that distinguishes peak performers from mediocre performers. And it's a type of practice that has 3 characteristics. It slows you down when you're practicing. It requires that you set a goal for every practice session, a small goal for just that practice session. So it slows you down. You set a goal to achieve in that session. And there's a feedback loop mechanism built in to that practice session. I have tons of examples from people, especially in the sports area. I had a student in one of my classes who was training for one of the Olympic teams in skating, ice skating. And when I talk about this in class one day, she came to me during the break and said, Dr. Goodson, do you know how we practice skating in our practice sessions and you know, in the camps for the Olympics and stuff? I said, no, I have no idea. I've never been a skater myself. So I said, well, you know, we're ice skaters, but we practice on cement, barefoot on cement. And I was going, and she said, it's exactly that idea of it's an environment that forces you to slow down, pay attention. We set goals for that practice session, and we always have somebody observing us while we're practicing to give us feedback on what needs correction. So we need to start thinking about our writing from a deeper, deliberate perspective if we can. I'll talk about the issue of feedback loop when we talk about support in a minute. Don't have time to detail it. Go read Dan Coyle's. It's a fabulous book. And then I'll give you some resources where you can delve a little bit deeper into this notion. But writing requires practice, folks. That's it. You can't just produce this awesome, amazing article that's going to be published in the Science Journal or Nature all of a sudden without a lot of practice, okay? One strategy that I do want to recommend is that you practice daily in small chunks. Let me get my pointer here. And so emphasis on small chunks, especially for people who hate academic writing, who don't want to do it, who are always procrastinating. Try this. Try doing it in very small amounts. How small? I put 30 minutes there, but that's just a parameter, a rule of thumb. The idea is talk to yourself, you know yourself as an author, ask yourself, how many minutes can I do without throwing up or getting sick? And then if it's 5 minutes, do 5 minutes. If it's 2 minutes, do 2 minutes. Don't underestimate ridiculously small investments of time. Never underestimate this. It's amazing what you can do cumulatively if you do it in small, tiny little amounts. I have tons of examples about that also. One of them being when I wrote a proposal for a book that I wrote 15 minutes every day thinking, oh my goodness, it's going to take me 10 years to write this proposal in 15 minutes a day. And in 3 or 4 months, when I decided, let me look at what I have and all this mess of 15 minutes a day, and I had 80% of the proposal done that way. I couldn't even believe it myself. And because I was underestimating the 15 minutes a day. There's a little book, tiny little book called The Kaizen Way that talks about this idea of ridiculously small amounts of investment into a complex dynamic system has many times disproportionate outputs. And vice versa, sometimes huge amounts of input into a complex system yields very little output. It's not proportional, but many times small amounts of investment yield huge results. It's amazing, and I don't know exactly how to explain it except for the dynamic systems perspective. That's usually what happens with dynamic systems. So do it in small chunks. You might need several small chunks in a day, especially if you're writing a thesis, a dissertation, or a book, or whatever it might be. You might need several small chunks. That's okay. But there's the idea, the beauty of doing it in small chunks has to do a lot with our attention spans. So I think it's awesome that we do it, I do it many times in 20-minute increments, like 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. And one of the beauties of this is that every time you come back to it, if you take 5 minutes break, go walk around the block or wash the dishes or something, come back in 5 minutes and pick up your writing again. What happens is that you reset your attention. So every time you come back to your writing, it's like hitting the reset button. You reset your attention to full attention. And by the time your attention starts dropping, and we're children of our generation, our attention spans are dropping drastically. So by the time it starts dropping, which is around 30 minutes for a lot of us, you don't let it drop completely. You break, You take a break, refresh your mind, come back and reset your attention. So even if you do, 5 chunks of 20 minutes throughout the day, that's 100 minutes of full attention to your writing. That's different than saying, oh, I have all morning to write. And then I have no meetings, I have no classes, I'm just going to write all morning. Yeah, right. Probably not. Okay. Some people are going to say, oh, but we write complex things and we need to immerse ourselves in it. Yes, you do. And if you're that kind of writer, stay with that. If that's working for you, stay with that. I also like to immerse myself and have longer chunks of time, sometimes in a project, depending on where that project is. But many times just to start on a project that I don't want to write on, the small chunks of time that I negotiate with myself are amazing, because I know I don't have to stay with something I don't want to do longer than 10, 15, 20 minutes. That's it. And then there's that really accomplishment feeling afterwards. I did it. I did something, at least on this project I don't want to work on. So for that, use timers. Use digital timers, use the Pomodoro technique. Google Pomodoro. Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. And it's because the timer is shaped like a little tomato. But the idea is use timers, time these things, time your breaks, time the time that you're on your task, and follow that. Timers are our friends, especially for tasks that we don't like to do. And set goals. Every time you have a writing session, tell yourself, or better yet, write it down. What is my goal for today? My goal for today is to edit the first 2 paragraphs of my introduction. Okay, that's my reasonable goal. I set my timer for 25, 30 minutes, whatever it is. And then I try to do that. And then I come back and say, okay, did I achieve my goal in this session or not? And sometimes, many times I didn't complete my goal, or I said, yeah, I did achieve my goal. What am I going to do next? Then I leave myself a little note that says, next, do this. And I make it very concrete, verb-oriented phrases, very short phrases that tell me exactly where to pick up that project again later on. Because I may step away from that project for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but sometimes I step away from a project for 5 months. And some maybe 5 years. Like, when I come back to this, where am I going to pick this up? Where was I, right? If I left myself very specific notes and very concrete, like define this variable, or contact so-and-so to get this piece of information, something really concrete. I don't have to, when I come back 5 months later, I don't have to say, where was I? Did I do this? I just go, okay, I can't remember where I was on this. Let me just start by doing exactly what I told myself I need to do. I'm going to start by defining X. And as I start defining X in writing, that project starts coming back. That's a way to get immersed in it again. It's amazing how it works. So set goals. And I have, for every writing project I have a journal, which is just a Word file that says journal. And I put the date, my writing session, what I want to do in that writing session. And then after I write and do it, I come back to my journal and say, did I accomplish, not accomplish my goals? And what am I going to do next? My inspiration for that comes from archaeologists. I don't know if any of you are in archaeology, but how is it that archaeologists can come back to a dig the next day? So they're digging something and with their little brushes, and it's really like delicate and barely visible, and it's nighttime and they can't continue the dig. What do? They put a little flag right there, right? And they mark exactly the spot where they need to come back tomorrow and start digging again. And so I write that next, and maximum 3 bullet points, not more than that. Those little things, that's my little red flag there that says start here. And by starting here, I start getting immersed back into my project instead of staring at the screen for 3 hours, trying to remember where the heck did I stop in this project. Okay. Another strategy, track your writing time or your productivity or something, but track. My colleagues who do research on exercise and sport and stuff like that have written a lot about this, that anything you want to get done, track it. Keep a log, keep a record of you doing that and how often you're doing that. There's research on academic productivity writing, academic productivity of scholars. in universities in the 80s. Robert Boyce did some studies with them and found out that faculty that logged or kept track of how much time they spent writing were 4 times more productive than faculty who didn't keep track. But he also did a tiny little study where he had some people just log their writing time or their pages, whatever they wanted to keep track of. And then he had another group that logged their writing time or their pages, and they did something else. They shared their log with somebody else on a weekly basis. And that group, that third group that wrote and shared, they were 9 times more productive than the faculty that didn't do any of that. So he had these 3 groups: the group that didn't do anything, the group that tracked, and the group that tracked and shared, right? And that was an amazing difference just with the sharing. So find a writing buddy. We'll talk about that in support. Find a writing buddy. Share your writing tracking, your writing logs. One of my writing partners is in this webinar today, this morning, if she still is there. She had a class to teach. But she and I exchange writing logs every week. And the only job of the other person is to say, yay, great, you did something, right? And there's something about turning in an empty log that says I didn't do any writing this week that doesn't sit very well with us. So at least we want to do at least 30 minutes to have something to turn in. And so it's an amazing way to make your writing happen and to be supported. We'll talk about support a little bit more later here. Another strategy, and this strategy for me personally was one strategy that was a game changer. And this one is separating the generating from the editing right here. It's hard to control a highlighter with a mouse. Try it if you haven't tried it yet. But this strategy is separating the generating from the editing. And I don't have, again, time to explain it in detail. I'll give you a resource that describes it, but not trying to do the coming up with ideas and already polishing them in superb quality writing and correct grammar and correct English all at once. When you try to do the 2 things at once, you will block. And there's a neurological reason behind that, okay? The image I like to give to my students is imagine yourself trying to drive a car and stepping on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. When you do that, what happens? Well, you go nowhere very fast, right? And it's jerky, and you just don't go anywhere, basically. Why? Because the mechanics among us, the mechanical engineers will explain that what you're doing is you are invoking 2 mechanisms that are antagonistic. They cancel each other out, and that's why you block. You stop, right? Same thing with the writing. When you're trying to come up with ideas, how am I going to structure this paper? What is my focus? What am I trying to say? What is my purpose in this article or whatever? When you're trying to do that and already write it in a way that is awesome, you are invoking 2 opposite antagonistic mechanisms in your mind and in your brain. Because when you're generating ideas, you're in the creative mode. And the ideas come to you and you don't know if they're appropriate, if they're correct, if there's accuracy in that, rigor, or you're not worried about that. You're just worried about capturing these ideas and having the big idea. So the creative dimension of our minds, right? When you're trying to make it look really good and correct, grammar and punctuation, then you're editing, you're refining, and that taps on different mechanisms in our brains. And some people are beginning to do studies of that, MRI studies of that, how it taps on different mechanisms. Your brain functions differently, and the 2 mechanisms cancel each other out. So if you can learn about this strategy in more detail, this was a game changer for me, because separating will get you writing something. By the way, did you notice that when you did your 2 minutes of free writing, you probably had a lot to say? Most people, when they have a moment of free writing, and I tell them, nobody's going to read your writing. You don't have to share it with anybody, but just don't stop. They're surprised at how much they have to say, how much they have that comes out in the writing. And why? Because they're not editing, and nobody's going to see it. Right? You're just capturing. So look at this as one of a game changer type strategy for you to try in your writing. Another strategy is mind map instead of outline. I'm a big proponent of not outlining before you write. Now, if you're the kind of person that thinks in outlines already, by all means, outline. Yeah, that's the way you function. But most of us mortals don't think in outlines in an ordered way. And therefore, when we have to write something, we don't know what we're going to say first and what we're going to say next. And then we might do an outline, and then we start doing the writing, and then we go, oh no, I shouldn't start that. I should start with this instead of that I put in my outline. So the writing goes in one direction and the outline goes in another direction. So I'm a big proponent of a strategy called mind mapping, which allows you to generate a lot of ideas. By the way, in front of you in this slide is sort of an example of a sort of a mind map here. So the idea is that it's a visual aid where you capture all of the ideas that you want to have in your writing piece without any judgment. So you're just brainstorming and putting all of the ideas there. Then later you can say, okay, today in my writing session of the morning, I am going to write about mind mapping. I'm going to write about this arm of the mind map only. I just need a couple of chunks about this. And then my other session, I might write about separating the generating from the editing. So I go and pick pieces out of my mind map and write about those. And later I put them together. And later there's a strategy called reverse outlining to check and see if your text has optimal order or structure or is organized in some way. Okay. So if you struggle with doing an outline before you write, drop it. But if you have already outlined, like you did a presentation at a conference and you're going to write that paper, by all means, it's already outlined. You know, don't have to try anything else. But if you struggle with outlining, try the mind mapping. And again, I'll give you resources for that later on. Another strategy that's a game changer that I don't, it's quite long. I can spend the whole half hour or 40 minutes talking about this, is the reading and writing simultaneously. One thing that keeps academic writers from writing is that they keep saying, I still need to read all these articles, this pile, or all these books. And I can't start writing until I finish reading all the literature. And so one resource that I'm going to point you to is my writing book. I have an appendix in there, and I titled the appendix, How to Stop Using Reading as an Excuse for Not Writing, right? Or as an excuse for writing, avoiding writing. So you don't have to. You don't have to read the whole literature before you start writing. There is a technique, there's a strategy that allows you to, as you read something in small chunks, sound familiar? Read in small chunks, and your mind is interacting with that material, you are capturing that interaction in writing. So you read something and you go, I've read this paragraph 3 times, I still have no idea what this person is saying. And you capture that in writing. You look at that later and you say, lack of clarity in this literature. I wonder if this is a trend in the entire literature. And you're writing all that because that little thing you read is making you think these things. Write that down. Those things may not end up in your final project, paper, report, whatever it is that you're writing, but they may inform a lot of what you address in your final paper. And you already started what? The practice. You already started writing something. That something may not be in your final product, but you need the practice and you need to write a lot of words to throw a lot of words away. Also keep that in mind. So don't wait until you've done all of the reading before you start the writing. Go look and learn the strategy for reading and writing simultaneously, which I call the matrix method. And again, I'll point you to resources for that. But that one is for me also a game changer because I like to read. So if I feel like I have just one more book to read or one more paper to read, I use that as an excuse for not writing. But when I have this strategy now, I don't have an excuse. I don't have to wait. I like to write about topics I know not much about because that's one way for me to learn about them, right? So instead of reading the entire literature on that topic, I'll choose 2 or 3 review articles about it, somebody who's really summarized the status quo of that topic. And I'll start reading that and it starts provoking my thinking. And I'm capturing that thinking already into my writing, into my matrix, I organize it in a table, and already I have some interaction. I already have some words. Are these words going to be words my readers are going to read? Probably not, but I need to write a lot of words to throw a lot of words away, so then my reader reads only the best, right? Another strategy, it's not as much a strategy as an approach, like the practice is an approach, is this one. Learn to relate to your writing, to think about your writing, and to use your writing to do a lot more for you than just reporting your research findings. Writing is the most powerful tool I know, the cheapest one, because it's free, for your personal growth and your professional development. I know of no other tool that is as powerful as writing. So use the writing to benefit you, not just your readers and not just the consumers of your research findings. So write to think, learn to use writing to clarify your thinking. By the way, you don't know what you really think until you write it down. You think you know what you think until you write it down. You'll be surprised many times if you start writing about something and you go, oh my goodness, I didn't realize, I thought I had these thoughts about this idea, right? So while your thoughts are just rattling around in your brain, then they're not organized enough yet. You really don't know what you're thinking. So writing is the best tool to give depth to your scholarship. If you want to go in depth in your scholarship and in your thinking, use the writing. The writing is also a great tool for diagnosing what you don't know. And you don't have to tell anybody you don't know something. But if you're trying to write about something and you can't write, it doesn't come out. Could it be that you really don't know it as well as you should? It's happened to me many times, and I'm going to try to write about something, explain something to my reader, and I can't. And I go, wait a minute, does this mean that I just can't find the words, or does this mean that I really don't know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So, and if I go, well, I really need to learn more about this. Great. I don't have to broadcast to the world that I don't know that. I just go and learn, right? So William Zinzer, a big name in the writing world, he taught writing at Yale for many years. He wrote a book called Writing to Learn. And in that book, he said, oh my goodness, I wish somebody had told me when I was in high school that I could learn mathematics with writing, because I would have. He said, I hated math and nobody had found a way to make it palatable to me. So I never learned to like it. But now that I'm a writer, I realize I could have learned math with writing. I wish somebody had told me that, right? So use the writing to think, use the writing to learn, use the writing to rehearse difficult conversations. If you're going to have a difficult conversation with your supervisor, or your advisor, or your committee chair, or a colleague or somebody, and you know that you're going to get emotionally altered during that conversation, so you're going to forget all your arguments, you're going to forget everything you want to say, practice writing that conversation down, word per word, the day before the conversation. There's research behind this idea also. There's an article in the journal Science about writing for 15 minutes before a high stakes test. And they did a study with several groups comparing the performance of students who wrote 15 minutes about why they were so worried about this test that they were going to take. And go check out the article. You will see the findings are incredibly interesting, and the effect sizes are really large. So there's something about putting in writing your concerns about something, your worries about something, or practicing a difficult conversation that has incredible documented value. Documented in the journal Science. It's there for everybody to see. And also rehearse job interviews. A lot of you are going to go into the job market, right? Looking for interviews and being interviewed. Write down an interview, because then you have a chance to edit and say, maybe I don't want to say this if they ask that. Maybe I should say it this way. And you have a chance to practice saying it in different ways through the writing. So folks, learn the power of writing and use it in your favor, right? To me, nothing more powerful. So the Protestant reformer, Martin Luther, about 400 years ago said very well, if you want to change the world, grab your pen, right? So nothing more powerful. Think about that, which is also a way of relating to our writing that we need to adopt that makes us become better writers and more productive writers also. Last but not least, a few strategies related to editing. And I'm just going to mention them and again, give you resources for it because there's tons of strategies for editing, but I would encourage you to learn strategies to edit your own work. It's okay to have somebody else edit your work for you, except that you won't learn anything. But if you edit your own work over and over and over, you get tired of correcting some things all the time. And you stop doing those things in the writing. It will improve. This is a huge investment in the quality of your writing, is learning how to edit your own work. And there are plenty of strategies and tools out there. I'll point you to a few of them. And one strategy that I particularly like is that when I am editing my work, I do it in rounds. So I learned to, I have a set of steps and I read my entire paper or whatever piece I'm editing. I'll look for only one thing at a time. I do one round looking for one thing, then I come back and I start again. I do another round looking for another. So one editing problem at a time in various rounds. It's amazing what happens when you do that. Last but not least, obtain feedback all along the way. Well, we're going to talk about that when we talk about support. But remember that deep practice notion that slows you down, makes you set a goal for each practice session, but has a built-in feedback loop mechanism. You need to get feedback in your writing all along the way. Again, I'll talk more about it when we talk about support in a few minutes. So let me get out of this slide. And here's a moment where I want to stop and see if you have a couple of questions. I don't have time to go too long and too many questions, but if you'll ask some right now, we'll address them and then we'll continue with the other elements in our system. So questions or thoughts or comments, doesn't have to be questions. No questions? Are you all so overwhelmed that you don't have any?
Pat, in the chat, there was a question about your preference writing with hand or typing. Also, someone had asked about the book you recommend for writing and reading simultaneously.
Yes, I will mention the book for the writing and reading simultaneously. When I mention the tools, I'll hang in there and you'll have it in the slides also. So you'll have all the notes for that. The question about writing by hand or writing by computer or keyboard, I get that question a lot. Somebody please do some research on this. I don't have data on that. All I can tell you is that when I do my personal writing, so I do personal journaling or any other personal writing that I do, I like to do it by hand because it slows me down. So the slowing down in the writing is the idea that if you slow down a little bit, you pay a lot more attention than if you're writing at 300 miles an hour, typing very quickly, right? But all of my academic work, anything that's work related writing, I prefer to do it on keyboard and typing it. And I do not know of any research that is exploring the question of, is one better than the other? I would say use both. But I used to be the kind of person that used to write manuscripts by hand, draft them by hand, and then put them in the computer. This was like 30 years ago. I stopped that very quickly because it was not efficient. I was wasting a lot of time. And so that's how I changed. Sorry for
There is another question about your journal. Do you keep a separate journal for each paper or just one journal that?
I have a separate journal for each project. Mm-hmm. So each writing project or each data analysis project has its own folder. And in that folder, I have a Word file that's labeled journal. And that's all it is. It's a Word file. And then I put today's date and my little goal for what's my goal for today's session. This is what I want to achieve today. And then I leave it there and go work on the project, write when it's time to be done, I will come back to my journal that I left open there, and I'll write, okay, I did achieve my goal today, or no, today was lousy. I said I was going to do this, but I went in a completely different direction. So next time I need to do A, B, C, the 3 bullet points maximum, sometimes just 1 bullet point. So I plant my little red flag right there, right? But I make it very concrete, not abstract. Like I never put next, think about this or that. No, it's something that I have to actually do with the writing. Define this variable, find an example for this argument, or edit this page. Something very, very concrete that gets me started. Once I get started, I get immersed back into that project.
Also, there's another question about collaboration. How do you synchronize different writing styles of collaborators?
Yeah, so the strategy for writing collaboratively that I've learned works is usually we divide a project and we give it out to different people to write different sections. But if you want that piece to really sound cohesive and coherent and sound like it was just one person writing it, one person in the team needs to take on the task of almost rewriting it in their own words. So it's not just editing, and that's usually that task falls to me many times in my teams. And so as I say, give me your piece, give me your method section, give me the results section. I probably wrote the introduction already, and I will reword the methods and the results as if I were writing it. So then it sounds like it's one person from start to finish. That's I think the ideal. A lot of what we read out there is not ideal, as you well know. You can tell that this paper was written by 5 different people, right? Yeah.
I might comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I might comment on your comment regarding the use of additional material from different disciplines in writing a particular paper, regardless of what it's on. I have used so many disciplines in writing the technical document that I'm currently involved with. Just for example, I'm writing about electronics equipment, but I delved into medicine, 19th century medicine, and 19th century medical tools, other things about, well, in the same general area, but different disciplines. And you can learn so much and gather so much more material from doing that. You don't have to write it all down. As you said, your audience doesn't need to know that you know all this and how you found it.
Or that you don't know.
They just need to know it. And that's really been helpful to me. That was something came out in 90 Days and 90 Ways, by the way, I think.
Yes, yes.
That was
Thank
very good.
you. Appreciate that. Yeah. So true. Yes. And
Do you want to continue? Sorry, go on.
No, I'm now doing research on interdisciplinary research, and it's a bear, but it's so rich. Go ahead, Mina.
There are some other questions. Do you want to take care of them or leave them for later?
Do you see any that are really pressing that needs clarifying?
All of them are pressing, I think, from the perspective of the person who has asked them. But okay, there is one about separating editing and writing, if you want to refer to it later. Another one about being non-native English speaker and thinking in English or in any language that you want to write.
Yes.
Also,
yes. Let me address that one, Mina. Let me address that one real quick. For the people who are speak multiple languages and are having to write in English, when you're generating the ideas, when you are just writing the ideas without editing them, generate, capture in any language. And oftentimes you can't think of a word in any language. Draw a picture, or write an equation, or just take a photo and put it there, or something. Capture the idea in whatever shape or form. Later, when it's editing time, then we're going to slow down, and then we're going to come back and clean it up and find the exact word for that, the more precise word for that you can. It's going to take time. and you need to do that slowly and with a lot of intention. But so if you're a non-native English speaker or writer, don't worry about that. Use whatever languages come to mind. And if you can't think of a word in any language, try something else just to capture. The idea is that when you're generating ideas, capture, capture, capture. And by the way, folks, have ways of capturing your ideas anywhere, anytime, including in the middle of the night and including in when you're showering, when you're taking a shower. I learned about, here in the US, I learned about water crayons from a student because I told the class, I said, I have my best ideas when I'm taking a shower. Because of course you're relaxed, right? And she said, Dr. Goodson, do you know about water crayons? And gave me a little box of water crayons that you can write on the, she said, my 2-year-old daughter uses it to write on the bathtub when she takes a bath, or to draw, of course, she's 2 years old. I capture thoughts when I'm in the shower. I capture thoughts in the middle of the night. Have something, and it can be a recorder. It doesn't have to be a computer or a keyboard or paper even. Have it next to you always, because the more you capture your ideas, the more you will have. I have no scientific explanation for that, so I call it magic. But it does happen. The more you capture, the more you have. The less you capture, your mind goes, okay, not open for business, and stop sending you ideas. And then you sit there and say, I need an idea, and it won't come. But if you have this habit of just capturing, 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 you'll see how many ideas you will have. It will amaze you. Yes.
Okay. There's one hand raised if you want to see.
Go ahead, Mina.
There's one hand raised. I think a question about an outline. Also a question about how do you start? How do you get started after you have been quiet for a while?
Okay. So I'm not sure, am I answering that question that you just asked, or do I want the person with the hand raised to ask?
I think the person who has raised the hand, because we did not respond, has put the question in the chat as well.
Okay, so can you repeat it, please, Mina?
Yes, I think it is, if not using an outline, do you have any suggestion for ordering the writing trunk from mind mapping?
Yes, so I will show you a resource for that about how to do it. And the idea is that you don't order it in the beginning. You just write chunks, pieces of writing for each of the elements in your mind map. And then later there's a strategy for organizing. That strategy is called reverse outlining. And I'll give you the resource for that. Yeah. So don't worry, it was very ordered. Go ahead, Mina.
One last one is, my question is simply one, but might be difficult to implement. How do you get started after a long stint being lost in the literature daily life?
How I get started very slowly sometimes. Now, if you look at my strategy that I'm going to give the resource about reading and writing at the same time, I organize what I read and my interactions with my reading. I organize it in a way that is in a table in a matrix. And therefore, if I look downward in the columns of the matrix, I have stories to tell. But if I'm having a hard time starting anything, my best friend for that is a timer and negotiating with myself, starting small. So maybe 5 minutes. And all I'm going to do is maybe set up my journal file and look at what was the last thing I read or something like that. I'll give myself a very small task. And after 5 minutes are done, I go and do something else and then I come back. So just that feeling that I have started something, and even if very small, is a feeling that keeps you going later on, and you can build on that. I don't know if it answers your question, but that's one thing that I do. So, okay. So let me get going. Like I said, I can stay later to answer questions, but I need to finish this in the right amount of time. Right? So let's get going here, and I'm sharing again. Can you see it, Malika? Is it there? Okay, thank you. So the next set of elements in that system. So we talked about you as a writer. We talked about the set of strategies very briefly. And those are not all the strategies available. There are tons of others. Those are just some. Now let's talk about tools, the set of tools. And I have a blank slide right there because I'm going to present these tools in a list for you here in this slide. So this one I'm saying it'll be available to you later as a handout. You can have this list. So here are the resources that I keep pointing to also. the first one is my writing book, and it's not because I think it's fabulous and that you need to read my book because it's my book, not because of that. It's just because I have explained all of these strategies in detail in this book, and I structured it as exercises. So it has about 29 exercises to help you develop a sustainable, healthy writing habit. And the other exercises are exercises to write better introductions, methods, results, and discussion sections in academic pieces. And there are exercises like this: set your timer for 10 minutes, then do this, then do this, then do this. So it's like a workbook type of thing. In that book is where one of the appendices is about how to do the reading and writing at the same time. You'll find that in the appendix. You'll also find descriptions of how to do mind maps and use the mind map for writing also. You'll also see a very detailed step-by-step what you need to do to organize the chunks that you wrote that are out of order. How do you then put it in order? I have description there also for that. So take a look for what it's worth. Believe it or not, I use my own book. When I'm writing, I go to it for several of the checklists. The second book, the second resource or tool that's there is my most recent publication, which is with Mina and Malika as co-authors. It's a little book that we developed to inspire academic writers, to get academic writers something every day, like a motivation pill every day to get their writing going. But it's not just motivation, it's a lot of information and a lot of strategies and tips also. So take a look at that if you want something fun. And by the way, it has cartoons, and it has several entries that are humor based to laugh a little bit about ourselves in academia. It is laughable, right? And you can thank Mina for all the funny stuff that's in there because she's the one who wrote that stuff. The other resource here is Helen Sword. Helen Sword is a professor at I think University of Auckland in New Zealand. She's in New Zealand, I know. And she has done a lot of interesting research on academic writing and academic writers. And she's starting a resource online. So if you go to helensword.com, you'll find support, you'll find tools, you'll find strategies, all for free. And if you want to sign up for something that she's developing called the Write Space, just yesterday I attended a 2-hour workshop with someone that was sponsored by Helen Sword, but you don't have to pay for anything to get a lot of really great resources there. So check it out. The Stevens book, Donnell Stevens is a colleague of ours and a friend, and she recently wrote this book, Write More, Publish More, Stress Less, 5 Key Principles for Creative and Sustainable Scholarly Practice. This book is required reading in my writing productivity class right now. It is an amazing book because it's a set of tools and strategies like you wouldn't believe. So many templates, resources, ways to do things that you would have never thought about. And she writes beautifully. So it's fun to read her book, very enjoyable and very, very practical and useful. So hopefully all of these resources are going to be very useful for you, I hope. One here is the TAA, the Textbook and Academic Authors Association. This is an organization that I would invite you to take a look at them and consider joining. Malika, Mina, and I are members of the TAA. And all it is an international organization of academic writers, people in all different fields of academia that are writing either textbooks or articles for publication. So and it's a whole world out there, right? Just for those 2 types of writing. And it's a great supportive community. So if you join them, it's very cheap to join also. You can have access to online communities to support you in your writing. If you have a question about writing, you can go online and ask them about it. It's just absolutely fabulous. One of the handouts, along with the slides, I sent to Ibrat I think it's a PDF file or a Word file, one of the 2, that has a newsletter, the winter newsletter from TAA there for you to take a look. And I'm sending it to you because on page 3 or 4, I wrote an article about all of this that we're talking about, writing as coming out of a complex system, but it also gives you a taste of what TAA is and what they can do for you. if you take a look at that newsletter. The next book by Tara Gray, Publish and Flourish, Become a Prolific Scholar. Dr. Tara Gray is a professor at New Mexico State University. She was responsible for me doing this right now because the first time I learned about all of these strategies for writing was in a workshop that she did. So I learned all of this rather late, folks. I learned this, I was already probably associate professor, so mid-career associate professor, or going into associate professor. So it was, wow, I wish I had learned this when I was in graduate school, right? But she writes this book, Publish and Flourish, which is a very small book, full of resources also that you can use and implement immediately. Another tool that I recommend is ProWriting Aid or Grammarly, and they are online platforms that will correct your writing in terms of grammar and style. I am a big fan of ProWriting Aid for various reasons, but they're both similar. ProWriting Aid and Grammarly have a tool like that at your disposal. And if you pay for them, you can copy and paste an entire paper, an entire chapter into that platform, and it will do several reports for you. It will check for style, consistency, like you opened a quotation, didn't close it. You spelled somebody's name one way here and another way there. It flags that for you. It shows you grammar problems. Unfortunately, for those of us who are not native English speakers, it doesn't catch English usage problems. For that, you still need a person. Computers aren't very good at doing that yet, but it's a great tool. I use it. I recommend you have something like that to use. Last but not least, I want to recommend this online platform also called Phrasebank. And it's developed by a professor at University of Manchester, UK, right there in your alley, Brat and Mina and Sergey. This Phrasebank, basically, it's absolutely free. What it is, it's a compilation, huge compilation of sentence templates. And it's divided into sentence templates that you can use in an introduction, in the methods section, the results section, the discussion section. Go there and feast on it. Those sentence templates, if you complete the sentence with your data or your information, you've already started writing something that sounds academic, and it's not plagiarism. Those sentence templates come out of just the normal or common way that we say things in academic settings. I was going to stop here and ask if anybody has favorite tools that they like to recommend or suggest. And my timer just dinged, saying I have only 10 minutes left. So I'm going to ask that if you have tools or suggestions of resources that you'd like to share, that you put it in the chat for us. I appreciate that. And I'm just going to move along so we can finish it in the right time. So the last element that we need to talk about in the system is support. And it's last in the sequence, but it's perhaps one of the most important elements. As an academic writer, we need at least 3 different types of support. We need emotional support, social support, and what I call instrumental support. Emotional support. We need people that are around us that know how hard it is to be an academic writer. And we need people around us that will love us even though we write really badly, right? They don't care. We need the emotional support. Actually, folks, you can use writing to support yourself emotionally also. I have one of my doctoral students is in this webinar right now, and she's doing her dissertation on using expressive writing, which is writing about your feelings, to manage writing and academic stress. So be on the lookout. She's finishing her dissertation. She'll be publishing on them. So the idea is that you can use writing to support yourself emotionally, but you need people around you to do that also. You need social support. You need people around you that speak the same language of academia, that really understand what you might be going through when you just can't do any more writing, or when you have 30 pages to turn in 3 days or something like that. They understand that. You need those people around you too. But I'm going to say that most importantly, what you need is instrumental support. And by instrumental, I mean feedback. You need to have people around you that are going to give you feedback all along your writing project. I spend 2 hours in one of my workshops talking about feedback. There's so much to say, and I don't have that here, but here's what you need to know. We usually get feedback only at the end of our writing, and that model is completely broken for many reasons. What you need, what I need, is we need feedback input into our writing project as it develops at every stage of development of that project, not only at the end. But according to Peter Elbow, who's now a distinguished professor of English at MIT in the United States, and he's retired now, emeritus professor, he wrote The Theory of the Writing Process. And he came up with this very simple idea that we need different types of feedback at different moments of our writing. Therefore, when you're starting a project and it's a messy draft, you don't even know if you're going to keep that idea, you don't want people giving you feedback on your grammar because you're probably going to throw that idea out and start over again anyway. That's not the appropriate feedback at that moment. The appropriate feedback at that moment is for somebody to read that and say, oh, this is a great idea. Tell me more. Or this idea is interesting, but kind of like we've heard that so much in our field, not as interesting. How about if you try to do it this way? And you go, oh, hadn't thought about that. And you had not written a 30-page piece yet, just a page or so. And you say, okay, let's ditch that idea and let's go for this other idea that sounds much better, right? So the appropriate feedback at this appropriate moment of development of the writing project is incredibly important. And it's, for a lot of people, it's a new concept. So we need different people that we sign up in our minds, or actually make a list of them, who are good at giving us feedback of different kinds. And we go to those people at different moments for our feedback needs, but we go constantly, regularly. So we need to write regularly. We also need to get feedback regularly. So I like to compare academic writing to ultra marathon running. If you know anything about marathon running or ultra marathon running, these are these races that are more than 100 miles long. And I put a little, this is a snapshot here of a DVD that I had the privilege of watching a long time ago, and it's hard to find now, but it's out there. That is a documentary on one of the most difficult ultra marathons in the world. It's done in the hottest place in the United States during the hottest month of the year. So it's run in Death Valley, and it's run in August. It is so hot that you see this white strip here on the picture. They actually have to protect the pavement with a white strip so the tennis shoes, the sneakers, the shoes of the runners don't melt. It's that bad, right? What's fascinating about this ultra marathon is that people are not allowed to run this race at all if they don't have a crew, if they don't have a support team. When they enroll they have to be invited actually and selected, but when they enroll to run this marathon, they have to say, here's my team. And it has to be more than one person, at least two people, that are going to be practically running alongside the runner the entire mile. So this race is called Bad Water, and it's 135 miles. I have a friend who actually has run this race at least twice. And he says, yes, Pat, you're absolutely right. Nobody can get to the finish line without a support crew, without a support system. So my question for you is, if you're in academia, especially if you're trying to graduate, right? But even later, folks, it doesn't get any easier. But if you're trying to graduate, if you're trying to get to the finish line, you are not going to make it to the finish line in a very healthy way if you don't support yourself, if you don't have a crew. So I want to challenge you to start thinking, who is your crew? Who is your support system? Who are those people that are going to be running right along you? alongside you during the whole race. And you need people that are going to provide those different types of support, the emotional, the social, and especially the instrumental support. And you need to actually go ask them to be your crew. They are not going to volunteer for this. So reminding you, this is how I would challenge you to think about academic writing as a complex system with at least these elements. Keep in mind there are others, but these are the most important ones, I think. And I hope that you will start thinking about your writing in that way. And what's the goal of thinking about our writing in this different way? I would propose that these are the goals that I strive for. Sustainability, something that you can take on for 30, 40 years of your career, because if you're going to be an academic, that's what you're going to be doing. A healthy writing habit, a writing habit that lowers your stress, because we add a lot of unnecessary stress to ourselves if we don't have a system to work with. And of course, increased productivity. But increased productivity to me is not as important as the healthy aspect, because I really want to get to the end of my career in writing, still in love with writing. I don't want to actually, get to a point where I say I'm totally burned out. I can't write a single word any longer, right? So, so that's what I had to say. I am not sure, I haven't looked at the time. Perfect. I'm 1 minute away from the time. I'm just going to end here and say I can stay on for answering questions if you want to stay on, or if Sergey can stay on because he's the host. But I just want to thank you for your attention up to here. If you have questions, you can find me very easily online. Just let me know. And if you contact me, let me know that you were in this webinar so I can sort of place you, even though I can't see you, and I don't like that. I wish I could hear everybody. So your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you very much, Mina and Melika, for this really insightful source and source of inspiration as well. So writing is not easy, but you say it is possible, right? So it is encouraging. And as I read the chart, it looks like many of us have already used some bits and pieces, and you just bring this together in a system, in an elegant structure. So hopefully we will be able to add to our arsenal of techniques, and hopefully it's gonna work even better. All right, so great session, great set of techniques. I have a very special thank you to you for the remarks on unproductive feedback on grammar. So it is killing me, right? Whenever I do my best, I sit in the office for a couple of months writing that bit, then submitting to my native speaking panel, and they say, Sergey, it's the English. And my instant thoughts, what are you talking about? It's gonna cost me £100 to make it bright and shiny in English, right? And I spent 3 months of my life on this. So can we please forget about English and talk about the stuff written? Thank you very much.
That's the way to do it, Sergey. That's the way to do it. And that's how I guide my students when they're working with their professors or their teams. I say, you need to educate the people that you're asking feedback from, because they're not used to this. And you need to go to them and say, could you please ignore the language right now? I will take care of that. I will make it shine later on. But right now, here's what I need from you. And give them one task. And say, could you read this and answer this question? And give them only one task. Don't ask them to edit or look at things, at multiple problems. Go for one problem. And therefore, you should go with small amounts of the writing, not with a 30-page paper immediately. I recommend going with 2 or 3, 4 pages to one person and saying, could you read this for me and answer this question? And forget the grammar, forget the writing, forget the, I'm going to add citations. Don't if you can, please overlook that and just answer this question for me. You'll find that people are more willing to give you feedback if you do it that way in small chunks, even if it's repetitive. And you give them only one thing to look for. They may find other things that are helpful, but you ask them to focus only on one thing. And that tends to work a lot better. And we do it all the time, right? Mina, Malika, Chen, all the people who work with me know that we're doing it constantly. Like, now these 2 pages, now these other 4 pages, and now this other page. We're doing it regularly because we also need to practice feedback giving and getting. It's not just the writing. And we also need to practice it so that later on we have so much practice with feedback that when people give us harsh feedback, but it's not useful, it doesn't hurt anymore. Because you look through that and you say, oh, this person just doesn't like my topic or doesn't like me. That's okay, but they are not able to give me one useful recommendation to make this paper better. That's useless feedback. It doesn't even hurt anymore. That's the level of practice that you need to achieve. But the only way to do it is to do it over and over and regularly and like weekly, if you can, get feedback, get practiced getting feedback. So for that, start small groups or have a partnership with another academic writer and agree to exchange feedback once a week on, let's say, a page. That's it. That'll start you getting practiced and used to receiving feedback, but always give the feedback giver one task and say, could you read this for me and answer this question? Does it feel like it flows? That's it. So in my writing group, I have a writing group with some of the folks that work in a service that I created here at the university. And that's the rule. Every time somebody comes and wants feedback, it's like, okay, tell us the story of this thing that you want feedback on. And what are we reading this for? What is our one task? And we just home in on that.
Thank you very much, Pat. I feel I hijacked the call with my catharsis on the feedback, but now I took a note, right? Because now I'm more often tasked to give feedback instead of receiving feedback. So that's a lesson for me as well. So guys, now I want to open the floor for the questions. So if you have a question to Pat, to Mina or Melika, please unmute yourself and ask your question directly. I've lost the track on the chat, so I wouldn't be able to do any kind of clustering here. So just unmute yourself and ask your question. Brave souls.
Hello.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, Anastasia.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just everything you said, really, I really know that it works. Just a small question regarding your opinion for blogs. I recently discovered that it could be great motivation because I know that at the end there will be somebody who will potentially read that. So it really affects the quality of my thinking, my writing. So what would you think about that? And also the danger of sharing online your ideas?
Yes, so you need to be wise. So I'm going to start with the second one, second question. You need to be wise about your writing. So so if you're going to share your writing, you need to do it in a setting that is safe, that you feel safe, that you feel you can share in on all that. So be careful with whom you share your writing, and sometimes it's and it depends on what part of the writing also, because sometimes it's not a really innovative idea necessarily, and you can be freer to share it with other people than other ideas that you write. But I just say, be wise about it. Now, I always recommend that when you're developing your crew, that you develop it with people that you trust, and hopefully people that are really on the same boat as you are, because then we know that everybody's interested in everybody else's success. There's no interest in being critical or too harsh or too mean. Leave that for the reviewers of our work outside, right? But create a safe space in order to practice these things. Don't go out practicing with people you don't know or don't trust very much at all. Now, if you are a lot of my students work in laboratories that have innovative ideas, and they're very reluctant to share their ideas. So I always recommend pair up, find a partner, a writing partner, or start a small writing group with people outside your field, entirely outside your field. So if you're an engineer, pair up with an educator, or if you're a biologist, pair up with, you know, an economist, and because they will have no interest whatsoever in stealing your ideas from you at all. And I don't remember what the first question was, Anastasia. So
you actually answered my broad question about blogging. I think the main idea would be to prefer creating a group that you trust rather than just throwing out to the world straight away. Yeah.
I would not
Yeah.
throw out to the world, no. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Who had a question that
I
got-
do. Hi, Pat. Thank you so
Hi.
much. Hi there. One of the questions that's starting to develop for me in general that you might have an opinion on is the different styles of journals, and then the different styles for European, UK journals compared to American journals. And I'm wanting to produce work that's widely shared and be able to communicate with all of those communities and more, you know. So developing an awareness of the styles and the flexibility to participate in the different styles. And that is a goal that's ahead of me, where I am now, but I have it in mind, and I'm just wondering how to develop that skill.
So in the list of tools that I gave, Marieshka, you'll see the book by Donnell Stevens. Take a look at that book, because she has a few tips, I guess you would call them, and templates where she recommends when you're trying to follow a certain style in a journal, she has steps for you to go and kind of get a couple of articles from that journal that you want to put your work in, and construct a little bit the structure to actually look at what do they tend to do. So for instance, she says, get 3 articles in that journal and look at their titles, and just and actually put it down somewhere in a place where it's organized, where you can compare across, you know, what is the style of their titles of articles, and then what sections do they tend to have, and how do they label those sections, and then read a little bit. But so she has this step-by-step strategy, I guess, for immersing yourself in analyzing and understanding the different styles that are out there. One strategy I have when people are trying to develop a more academic style in general, so not a journal style in particular. So I'm going to go beyond your question a little bit. One strategy I recommend highly when you're trying to write something, let's say you're writing, you don't know how to report a statistical test that you did. You don't know the language for that. I highly recommend a copying exercise. Copying is something that we use for any other type of motor behavior that we're learning. So if we're learning to play the violin, never played it before, your instructor is going to say, go look at some models and see how they do it, observe them, and try to emulate them, right? And you may start playing, when you start playing, you look a lot like player such and such, but eventually you're going to develop your own style. With academic writing, I actually say, if you need to learn how to write in a certain style in a field or whatever, get an article that's well written. Don't go getting poorly written stuff. Get a well-written article, put it next to you, and as part of your writing session, commit yourself to copying 1 paragraph per writing session very slowly. And you're not going to use those words as your words, because that's plagiarism. So I'm not telling you go plagiarize. I'm just saying this is an exercise. Like, go, if you want to be a better swimmer, go to the gym and do some bicep curls and strengthen your arms. This is the same thing here. Copy somebody else for style. And as you're copying, the rule is do it incredibly, agonizingly slowly. Remember that the student that practiced ice skating on cement, that's the idea. You're going to slow down when you're copying, because you're not copying and you're not paying attention to the content. You should be paying attention to how they use the words. how they sequence, how they start the paragraph. And therefore you need to slow down tremendously to do that. And after a while you go, oh, this is how they say it. These are the words, or a statistical test is reported this way. You talk about this first and that, but you're not just reading. If you just read it, you won't be able to translate it into your writing. You actually have to write that before you can write your own. So that's an extra tip in terms of not just the style of the journal, but the style of the language that you want to write in. Copying is a phenomenal exercise. I also explain it in my book, so it's also there. I hope I answered your question, Mariuszka.
Yes, thank you. Great tips. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question that's a little bit off, well, off the scale of what we've been discussing. But first of all, I want to say to you, Pat, this has just been marvelous for me. I'm not an academic writer, but most of these things can be applied to engineering writing, just writing in general for magazines, books, and I'm doing a book and a project, and never mind that. But my question that's somewhat far afield from this, but nevertheless needs to be answered by copying. I have used many dissertations for copying and many other books in and out of my field for copying, and basically learning how to write, how to communicate a given idea or group of ideas. However, when it comes to the permissible use of words, in other words, plagiarism or the lack thereof, there is what's called a reasonable use section of the writing codes. And I'm wondering if anybody in this group or anyone else knows whether that reasonable use applies to drawings, photographs, other illustrations that you may want to use from a book, either a 19th century book like I'm reading with and using, or a later book that's been produced. Does it
The issue is, Dewey, that if it has a copyright that is still valid, then you cannot reproduce it without permission, even for fair use. The definition of fair use in copyright is kind of vague, and
it is vague. They do give an example, but it does not include illustrations.
Yeah, but illustrations. So in our academic world, a lot of the tables, just a table of data, a graph, a figure in an article, that is copyrighted. The copyright belongs either to the author or to the journal, and therefore you cannot use those in your dissertations, even if it's not a publication. You're going to put it in your work. Dissertations get released, and so therefore you can't use it without asking for permission from.
What I need to do is get a good camera and go places. That's what I need to do that.
Your own figures. Now, what you can do in an academic world, what you can do, and I've done it, and a lot of us have done it, you can adapt and you can do a figure that is based on somebody else's figure, but it has to be different enough. And then you can say adapted from, and then give the source. And then you don't have to have the copyright permission. But if you're using a figure or a graph or a table from an article, and you want to just copy and paste it into your work, you cannot, because that is copyrighted also. It's protected by.
I'm very glad you mentioned the copying a portion and changing the photograph or the illustration, because that's exactly what I really need to do in this particular instance. But I just wanted to pose the question in case someone had other information on it. And this lady, I can't read her name because the print's too small, but the lady at the very bottom of my page looks like she's full of questions and is afraid to turn her microphone on or something. So we might check with her. It's a lady in the dotted blouse.
That's going to be hard here, Dewey, because we have about 78 people here. And,
oh yeah.
So I'm gonna
Your screen is gonna be
ask that
different.
if anybody has another question that they jump in and ask. Again, I can stay, but if you have to leave, don't feel bad, please. I don't
Let's-
want to hold you over time.
Let's have
Well,
a
thank
time
you.
goal
God
to
knows.
stay here no later than 4 p.m. UK time. So 12 more minutes, all
Okay,
right, to make it reasonable and sustainable. So
Yes.
I suppose we can afford 3 questions, 3 small questions or 1 big question. So it's up to you guys whether to ask small questions or big questions.
The questions are not necessarily big or small, it's the answers that are the problem. Right. So
Pat, there was something in the chat that I think was a very good idea. You know, the idea of writing groups. As an academic, any university I have worked for, I have formed a writing group that I learned from you, and it has paid off. But I am going to recommend it to PhD students as well. Do not think that feedback should only come from your supervisors, because reading somebody else's work always adds value. And in order to be able to get feedback from others, you have to give feedback. Otherwise, it wouldn't be something that other people look forward to do for you. So any PhD student can form a writing group in their department. You do not necessarily have to focus on the same thing, because you can adopt multiple lenses and learn from one another. And also, I think the other message I wanted to send was that for those whose first language is not English, I mean, for me, English is not even a second language, it's a total foreign language. I can say it's hard, it takes longer, but it is doable. Do not give up. I mean, the secret is just to get more practice, and it is doable. Do not think that, I mean, academic writing is nobody's first language, so don't worry, everybody struggles with that.
I always say that it doesn't matter how many languages you speak or don't speak, that academic ease or academic-ish is a language we're all learning, and we're learning all of the different dialects, right, Marieshka? Not because of the audiences that we're writing to, we have to adapt to their ways and styles and stuff like that. So yeah, it's like learning a new language. We're all in the same boat. Therefore, we all need to practice, basically. Yeah, thanks, Mina. That's a really good point. Writing groups, boy, I can't live without my writing groups or my writing buddies. It's just so vital for me personally, but also for my writing. My writing gets so much better because of them, and they prevent a lot of problems later on, because they will anticipate things that reviewers will raise that I can address immediately. It's a lifesaver. I can't emphasize enough. Oh,
But
hi, Kim, you have a question.
Yeah, Kimberly.
Unmute, there you go.
There we go. Yeah. Hi, guys. I'm going to ask a question. Should possibly be a very, very short answer to it to get it going, but I'm sure that if it hasn't happened to anybody, they know somebody it has happened to. I am recovering from COVID, and
I didn't know.
it's, how do I get started again? You know, it feels like that after 2 weeks of really doing nothing but sleeping. How do I jumpstart?
Hi, well, I'm sorry, Kim. I didn't see you last week, and I didn't know, so I'm sorry that you're going through that. My recommendation would be short, very gently, and look for a couple of things that you have less resistance, that you would like to try and start really, really small. So that's how I would do it. Start small and be patient with yourself, and knowing that you got to remind yourself that when you feel better, you'll pick it up again. That's not going to be a problem, and you're not going to feel this way forever either. It's a temporary thing. So, and then try to add tasks that bring you some kind of a satisfaction or pleasure that are enjoyable to do. That would be my recommendation. Anybody have another one?
I suppose that could be a universal recommendation to come back to writing after a break. You know, a bit like with running. You go for a jog after a 3 months break, and it is frustrating because you want to keep with the pace which you had 3 months ago, and apparently you cannot keep up with that. And so, but in a while, you are getting there. Right? Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you, Kimberly, for this question. I think Marieshka has a question, and we can come back to Kim later on. Marieshka.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Kim, too. For friendly peer reviews focusing on content and line of argument, would it make sense for us to share outlines with each other to maybe facilitate a quicker response and make it easier? Or thoughts on that?
If you like outlining, or if the person that you're sharing with requires or wants an outline, oh, definitely, yeah. But if you're not an outliner, like I'm not an outliner before I write, I'm an outliner after I write, then we have to do something perhaps differently, or share a mind map, share the ideas if you want to. But yes, it helps sharing outlines. That's a lot of professors ask their students to do that. Give me an outline of something. I hate it when they do that, because it's like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to say in what order. How can I outline it? Don't make me do that now. But does that answer, Marieshka? Is that okay?
Thank you. I was just wondering if that would be valid for friendly reviewers and or my supervisor if I started sending outlines.
Yeah, what you need to do is actually know your supervisor and the style of that person. And I always recommend that. Know how your supervisor likes to work. So some supervisors only want to see the final product. Other supervisors want to hold the hand of the student all throughout. So you need to know what they want, and then you need to educate them about, okay, if you're going to go with me all throughout, this is how we're going to do it. I am going to tell you what I need at this moment. And we're going to focus only on that thing. And I'm going to be coming back to, so you need to sort of educate the people there too, but you need to know them and what their style is.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Pat. We still have time for one more question, probably. I saw raised hand from Kimberly, but now her hand is down. So probably it was up just for the previous question. So one more question, and that's supposed to be a really good question.
I think, Pat, there is a question about handling multiple projects in the chat. It's a good one if we don't have
handling multiple projects. Oh, okay. I'm not sure exactly what you want me to say about that, but I'm going to give you a little strategy that I just now started trying, and it's working for me. And it has a little bit to do with what Kim was asking too. So this strategy goes like this. Make a list of 5 projects that you want to work on. And they can be not just writing projects, but maybe a data analysis project or washing your dishes at home or something like that. But make a list of 5 things and get everything sort of semi set up to go, and set your timer for 5 minutes and touch base with each of the 5 tasks for 5 minutes. And then if you need to, take a 5-minute break. And then you're going to start over again with task number 1, but now you're going to do 10 minutes on each one. And then when the 10 minutes are over on each one, which you've done 50 minutes, if you want to take a break, take a break. And I say if you want to take a break, because I usually build in a task there that is a break. So like, folding the laundry is one of the tasks, and that functions as a break in a way. So I don't feel like I need a break, but if you feel like you need a break, take a break. And then come back and start task number 1, but now you're going to do 15 minutes on each task. And so every time you come back, you'd add 5 minutes. And I started doing this one day when I didn't want to do anything. I was like, I do not want to do absolutely anything. And I have this list of things to do. How am I going to do this? I had heard about this strategy. I thought, oh, this sounds like a little game. Let me try it. And I was astonished that after 2.5 hours, I had to check my watch. I don't know how many times and say, has it been 2.5 hours that I've been doing this? I had touched base with 5 different projects, accomplished things. One of them was the folding the laundry thing, accomplished things that, and this moving around and marking off that I had done it and setting the timer again for 5 minutes, etc. It does a few things for your concentration. It gets you moving around. And it gives you the feeling that if nothing else, you started to touch base with a lot of those projects that you didn't want to look at. But now you're at least having them open and you're managing them. I don't stay with that for too long, because after about 2.5 hours of this, I'll say, oh, okay, project number 1 and number 2 are the ones that I now feel more motivated to focus a little bit more extensive time on it. So then the rest of my day, I'll probably focus on just 2 of those projects, but I know exactly where I'm going. I'm motivated to do it. It has a totally different feel. So it doesn't work for everybody, but give it a try because it's working amazingly well for me. Chen, who's here in the webinar too, was trying it out, was working for her and for a few other people. So that's how, but the key to manage several different writing projects is the journal, is to have that file that tells me all of the decisions that I'm making on that project and what I need to do next. That is a lifesaver for managing different projects. That tells me where's my flag and where do I need to start digging again. That combined with a rotation type of style for me tends to work really, really well, especially when I cannot decide which project is most important or more urgent, because they're all important and urgent. And I'm very bad at deciding which one is the most. So I'll just put them all on the plate and start working on all of them. And it's actually fun to do, so try it.
Right, I saw a hand from Carmen. Carmen, do you want to ask the very final question?
Yeah, hi. It's not much a question on the topic, but I was wondering if you have thought, or maybe you have already projects on training and coaching where you work on each individual system. So I've done so many trainings where it's so specialized, like we work on writing, editing, project management as separate things. And I really appreciate it today to have this summarizing, and it made clear for me, I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. It really helped me to place myself in my system. And I was wondering if you have any project in mind of this kind. And thank you so much for the clarity.
Thank you, Carmen. That's very kind of you to say, but outside of the university where I am and the writers that I work with, I don't have anything except the books and the books that I recommend as tools for you are places where you can start pulling the threads. So if you go into the reference section and start checking some of those things that we cite, especially in our newest book, The 90 Days, 90 Ways, that I wrote with Malika and Mina, a lot of tips and resources of people that you might want to contact and see if they're doing things like that also. But so those places are places to start drawing more information and not be limited to what we talked about today. So, but I'm glad that you're thinking about it as a system. Yeah, yay for you.
Great, thank you very much. I think it's time for us to finish this call. That was really great. That was intense, and that was really helpful. And we've got a long line of positive feedback in the chat. So I have a feeling that it was really productive for the delegates. Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you very much, Melika. Thank you very much, Mina.